Good evening and welcome to the Beaverton School District budget meeting. And this is April 20th, and I welcome you all that are watching us on YouTube. To start our budget meeting this evening, first we'd like to welcome our two new budget members. And sorry we're not there in person to welcome you to your first meeting, but we appreciate you being here tonight, and we appreciate our board and our budget members all being here doing very important work. One of the most important things we do as a district is have the fiscal responsibility to run a sound school district. So we thank you so much for being a part of that process with us. We're going to start off with everyone introducing themselves. And if you could introduce yourself, the board members, by saying what zone they're from and how long they have been on the budget committee. And after we're done with board members, we will go with our budget committee members. So starting us off, Susan.
Susan Greenberg, I've been on the school board. This is my 7th year, and I'm from Zone 1.
Anne.
Hi, I'm Ann Bryan, and this is my 8th budget season. Looking forward to being here.
Eric.
Zone 2.
This is Eric Simpson. This is my 5th year on the budget team, and I'm in Zone 3.
Leanne. Leanne.
This is Leanne Larson, and I am in my 11th year on the board, and I'm in Zone 5.
Right. And I'm Becky Timchuk, and I represent Zone 6, and this is my 5th year on the budget committee. And Tom.
It's Tom Collette. I represent Zone 7, and this is my 3rd year on the board.
And has Donna joined us?
Yes, I was having technical difficulties getting on for whatever reason. But anyway, Donna Tyner here. And I echo what Ann and Susan said, since we all joined at the same time.
All right, very good. And how about Ryan from the budget committee? All right, how about if we move to Sarah?
I am Sarah Beachy, Zone 2, and I started last year, so I've been through one budget.
Great. Bettina.
Hi, I'm Bettina Yasensky, and I'm on Zone 3 with Eric. And this is my 2nd season of the budget.
Great. And Miles.
I'm Miles Glowacki. This is my first budget cycle on the committee, and I'm in Zone 4.
Welcome, Miles.
Thank you.
Denise.
I'm Denise Peterberg. I'm in Zone 5, and this is my 5th year on the budget committee.
And Heidi.
Hi, I'm Heidi Edwards, Zone 6, and this is also my 5th year on the budget committee.
And Kristen.
Hi, I'm Kristen Lee. This is my 1st year on the budget committee. I'm Zone 7.
Very good. Welcome, Kristen. We're glad to have you. And has Ryan joined us? All right, we'll catch up with him when he gets on. So our first order of business at our budget meeting tonight is to elect leadership. And the first position open is to elect a budget chair. And the budget chair will run the meetings from going forward here. And we'll also be running all the next meetings that we have coming forward. So at this point, I'm going to open up elections. Does anyone have someone to elect for budget chair? Leanne?
Yes. I would like, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I would like to nominate Denise Peterberg for chair for our budget committee this year.
Are there a second?
I second.
All right,
Donna,
it's been moved by Leanne and seconded by Donna that we elect Denise Peterberg. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? All right, with no discussion, we'll call the question. I will ask, we'll call this a roll call vote. It'll be all the budget committee members. And when I call your name, you can vote aye, nay, or abstain. Susan,
Aye.
Anne,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Donna,
Aye.
Leanne,
Aye.
Becky, aye. Tom,
Aye.
Ryan. Okay, Sarah,
Aye.
Bettina,
Aye.
Miles,
Aye.
Denise,
Aye.
Heidi,
Aye.
Kristen.
Aye.
With that, we have unanimous vote. Denise, congratulations. You are our board budget chair. And with that, I will turn the meeting over to you. We are in your very capable hands.
Thank you, Becky. Our next item on the agenda is to elect our vice budget chair. Do we have a nomination for a vice budget chair?
Yes, I, Becky, elect Heidi Edwards from Zone 6.
And do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion by Becky and seconded by Leanne to elect Heidi as the vice budget chair. Is there any discussion? We will do a roll call vote the same way as the budget chair. You have the option of aye, nay, or abstaining, and I'll call your names. Susan?
Aye.
Anne?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Donna?
Aye.
Leanne?
Aye.
Becky?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
I'm not sure if Ryan's joined us. Ryan? Okay. Sarah?
Aye.
Bettina?
Aye.
Miles?
Aye.
Denise? Aye. Heidi?
Aye.
Kristen?
Aye.
Okay, by unanimous vote, we have elected Heidi as our vice chair. The next item on the agenda is the budget committee charge. And I believe Michael Schofield was going to go over that with us.
Sure. I got that from here. So what you have in front of you, or what you'll look at tonight, is the roles and responsibilities of a budget committee. The administration's role in this is we're charged with presenting the proposed budget to you. And in addition to that, you could kind of think of it as our best shot at what we think, with the resources available, what we need to meet the needs of our students. So when we put a budget together, we get information from community, from students, from staff, administrators, and eventually up to the superintendent's cabinet. And that's kind of the way we begin to build the budget. And so what you're looking at is kind of our best shot at that. The budget committee, your role, you approve appropriations, tax rates, and amounts. That's the law for you to do that. Your appropriation approvals are by fund and function only. So that kind of think of that as you're approving the budget in these big buckets of money that would be essentially a limit on what we as a district can spend. Our meeting is subject to public meeting laws and simple majority. The budget committee can inquire about programs, but doesn't make program decisions. Next slide, David. And your options for approval are to present or to approve the budget as has been proposed to you. You can increase the appropriation. In other words, you think we'll get more money, or you could decrease the appropriation because you think we'll get less. Those are kind of your three options. And I didn't really introduce myself, but I'm a long timer in this field. I'm new to Beaverton, got here in December, but I've been doing this work for a very long time. This is my 30th budget that I'm putting together that we put together this year. So I've been at it a while. I know that budget committees can sometimes get frustrated in terms of the role of a budget committee member. And I will tell you that's primarily because the role has changed. Prior to Measure 5, and again, I was working on budgets back then, the way budget committee, kind of the role and responsibility of a budget committee back then is the school district would bring to you and say, all right, here are the resources we have, and here's what we'd like to offer for kids for next year, whether it's class size, new textbooks, whatever the interest was of that community. And the budget committee would take a look at that and say, do we like option A, which is just basically a roll up of the prior year based on the levy? Or would we like to ask for more money so we could do this option B, which again might be lower class sizes or more resources, whatever the case may be. And the budget committee would then make that decision. And then it was essentially their job to kind of go out and talk to the community and talk about what the differences were between this Plan A budget and Plan B budget. And there'd typically be an election in May where you would say, all right, we as a community like option A better than option B, or whatever the case may be. Since Measure 5, that's kind of been taken out of our hands. We're essentially funded by the state now. So the state pretty much tells us what we're going to get year to year. And so it makes it a little more difficult for the budget committee to really weigh in and get into the meat of what we're doing for kids in our district. Now, having said that, what I typically like to do and what I like to, the way I like to work with the budget committee is to have you at that, 5,000 to 8,000 foot range where you're up there kind of looking at what we're doing and what we're proposing and kind of saying, yeah, I like the process you're using, or yeah, I like what you're estimating in terms of enrollment, or I think you're on the right track for where you think we're going to be headed financially, and just kind of get your thoughts about, are we headed in the right direction from a process perspective? So I'll be leaning on you, and Don will mention it here in a minute, but this budget's all pre-COVID-19, so we've got a lot more work ahead of us. So we'll be leaning on you kind of from a process perspective of are we headed in the right direction? And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Don.
Thank you, Mike. I just want to welcome and thank everyone for being here. So Don Grotting, Superintendent. For our new budget members, I'm completing my 4th year in the Beaverton School District and have about 25 years as a superintendent. I really want to welcome you to our first meeting of our 2020-2021 budget. Really want to express my appreciation to the budget committee members in these unprecedented times. I think it says a lot about your commitment to community service, to our schools, and to our children. As you are aware, we are in unprecedented times. Less than 3 months ago, our economy was doing better than it ever had. We were estimating about a $32.7 million increase to our budget through the Student Investment Act. And we had about 40,000 students being educated inside of our school walls in Beaverton. Today, we are at a record high unemployment. Our economy is at a standstill, and our schools are empty as we are teaching and learning from our homes. In addition, the Student Success Act, we were so desperately counting on, is now in jeopardy until our economy stabilizes. I'm not going to read my entire budget message to you, but want to point out some very key highlights that to be aware of, and Mike will go into a lot more detail. And as Mike said, this budget was put together with several assumptions that we can no longer take for granted. It was pre-COVID-19. You will see in this budget, it does include Student Investment Act dollars. We were really counting on right-sizing our budget and really adding some additional resources, which we know will probably not happen. A key date that will be coming up is May 20th. That's when Oregon's economic forecast will come out. There's been some presumptions that we could be looking at a state general shortfall of anywhere from $1 billion to $3 billion. And just to give you a little bit of perspective, what that would mean for the Beaverton School District, a $1 billion shortfall in the state general fund could be about $25 million deficit for our school district. Of course, we know that also on the bright side, Oregon has a rainy day fund now, the highest rainy day fund that they've had ever. But once again, I think it's at about $1.8 billion, but that's just not for education. That is for all the sectors in the state general fund. And what we've heard from a lot of legislators is they are going to be very careful about expending that rainy day fund because they believe that more precarious times will come in the next biennium. Our superintendent, Mike Schofield, he'll go into a lot more detail with this as we go forward, but we're really in some unknown, uncertain times. We have so many unknowns that are coming, and right now we're just operating with the information that we currently have. Regarding our budget this year with our community outreach required by the Student Investment Act, we have changed our budget process. It used to be we had an internal budget team that met that was mainly made up of just a few administrators. Where we've had the opportunity to go out and engage our community and listen to them, we are forwarding this budget to you based on a lot of the information that we were able to gather, as well as other information from administrators, staff, and others. This budget is being forwarded to you after being approved by our cabinet. You're also going to hear something about a new staffing allocation model from our Deputy Superintendent, Jenny Hansman of Teaching and Learning. And the reason we created this new staffing allocation model was to address some of the poverty in our schools and some of the equity issues that were taking place. This budget, as I indicated, does include the Student Investment Act. And the one we are hopeful that eventually our economy will come back. We have done a lot of great work. And when our economy does stabilize, we know what our community wants. We know what our kids need. So what I'm telling you is we're likely going to adopt a budget that will not be implemented in the fall of 2020. It will look completely different. Our legislators will go into special session, a special session, and if it's anything like previous recessions, they could go into multiple special sessions, and each time they go into that special session, we could be looking at a different allocation of money to our K-12 system. And once again, while the immediate future does not look very promising, our economy will eventually come back, and we will have a corporate activity tax that will provide additional resources to help our students. Another positive issue that you're going to hear about, as was in my message, is we've had a very successful implementation of our 2014 capital bond project. All of our projects will be completed and within the budget that was allowed by our voters. And so we're so grateful to that team, to our bond advisory committee team. And as we go forward, they keep working, and we keep working to make sure that we stay within those limits. And finally, I just want to say, we have been preparing as soon as we saw that this COVID-19 was going to take a drastic hit on our economy. And so we have basically frozen all budgets except for emergencies. A deputy superintendent has to sign all purchase orders. It has to be an emergency. And we are right now recovering some funding. And we believe the more funding that we recover right now, it will save jobs in the fall. Because I think that I just want to be really clear, I think we may be looking at one of the worst recessions that Oregon's seen for some time. And I think I know a lot of you are in the organizations that you work in, you're preparing for that too. So we're trying everything we can right now to mitigate the impact that's going to take place with our students and staff. Once again, I want to thank you for your time, and I want you to know that our staff stand ready to answer all of the budget questions that you may have. If we don't have the answers, we'll get the answers. And thank you for being here tonight, and look forward to a productive evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Grotting. We will next have the budget highlights by Michael Schofield and Jenny Hasman.
Thank you. So you see the presentation agenda for tonight, and these are the things we're going to work through. We're going to go through understanding the components of the budget. We're going to talk about the general fund, kind of where the money comes from, how we spend it, what our approach to budgeting looks like, and how we compare to some other districts, some large districts in the state, as well as just some neighbors. We'll talk about significant budget modifications, as Don mentioned, the student investment account, the new staffing allocation methodology. We'll talk about the numbers in the general fund, because I want you to show you kind of what we built the budget on. And then we're going to talk about COVID-19 in terms of what we know, kind of what we're doing now and where we're headed. And then finally, we'll deal with next steps. If you have questions as we go through the slide deck, feel free to throw your question into the chat, or let me know you have a question, or raise your hand. I'm sure one of the folks behind the curtain, David, you can gently nudge me if I don't see one, and let me know we've got a question. But that way we aren't going back 5-10 slides later on as we work through this. So next slide, please. Components of the budget. So we have our general fund, which is our core operations of the district. We have special revenue funds, which deal with grants, nutrition services, student body, those kinds of things. We have the debt service fund, where we pay for our general obligation bonds, pension bonds, or any other debt we have. We have the capital projects fund, which Don mentioned, and that's our facility construction, acquisition, and equipment. Enterprise fund, we don't have any of those in our district. Internal reserve funds, that's for insurance reserve, workers' comp. We set those out in a fund on their own. And trust and agency funds, which is primarily scholarships. This is the components in a pie chart. I know it's not awesome to read, but the big picture here is that about 57% of the total budget that we'll be asking you to approve is the general fund. The next big one there is our insurance reserve, or excuse me, our capital projects fund at 16.5%, our debt at 9.7%. And then you can see the pie going down the list of long-term planning, nutrition services, insurance reserve, workers' comp, those kinds of things. So that's kind of a big picture pie graph. General fund resources. Here's our chart for our chart for the general fund. You see the state school fund is $444 million, or almost 83% of our budget. So when we talk later, and you'll see we'll talk more and more about this, I talked about that at the beginning, but pre-Measure 5, districts kind of had a choice of what we wanted to do and how we wanted education to look like in our community. Since Measure 5, we're more of a state-funded organization in terms of the state tells us what we're going to get. While we collect property taxes locally, those are a part of the state school fund. Now, what's outside of that is our local option levy, any reserves that we have, our beginning fund balance, and then all other sources. And you look at the all other sources of about 24 million, about 12 million of that is payment from our ESD, and the rest makes up things like, charges for student activity charges. You think about interest earnings, just a myriad of other small dollar resources. Next slide, please. General fund expenditures. People often ask, how do you, when you've got a budget of $500 million, how do you begin to build that? And what does that thing look like? And we always start with essentially what our primary expenditure, which is our staff. So, and we have bargaining agreements with a number of them. So when you look at what we have to look at first, we have to look at what's been bargained. So we look at things like STEP for teachers and classified and even administrators if they get it. We look at column movement. And when I reference column movement, I mean folks that may move across the schedule because of not only the amount of time that they've been in the district, but it's usually they move over there for educational attainment reasons. Cost of living, if that's been bargained, we put that into the budget. Professional development is another area that's typically bargained. So we provide some professional development within our contracts to get incentivize folks to get some additional education. Working conditions is another big one. You don't think about that, but when you think about like prep time and those kinds of things for teachers, if we've got teachers without kids, then we've got to have somewhere for the kids to be, and that usually results in more people and more dollars. Benefits as well, we bargain those for health and other types of benefits. And leaves, we have those as well. Sick leave is in the law, so we certainly know what we get there. And in addition to that, we have these like personal leave and other types of leave. So we have to budget for those folks that require a substitute. That's kind of the big piece on staffing. When we get to the superintendent's cabinet, it's very defined and justify all. I have those written there because essentially speaking, and the process we went through this year is each cabinet member went to the superintendent, sat down, went through their budget and talked about every line item all the way through their budget. So superintendent gets to weigh in. It's not just a roll over whatever your balance was from last year and call it good. It was actually an exercise of going through and saying, what is that and why do you need it? So we went through that this winter. When it comes to schools, our staffing discretionary, those are just primarily similar to our state school fund. They're allocated based on the number of students and the demographics of those students. So we do that for staffing and discretionary. And in terms of how we implement that across the district, we use the staffing allocation methodology, which you'll hear about in a little bit, and the student investment account, which kind of parlays into the staffing allocation methodology. General fund expenditures. So the big takeaway on this slide is where we spend our money. And you see we spend just under 81% on salaries and benefits, or at least that's what we have budgeted for next year currently. When you look at contracted instructional services, what we pay to our charter schools, what we pay to keep the buses rolling and meet the law there, keep the lights on and the water going. We have some transfers out again to those funds that I mentioned when I talked about workers' comp, insurance reserve. Those kinds of transfers. And then we have the all other. The all other is 10.9%. And when you look at that 10.9%, and my guess is if we went through and really dug down into that, it's probably in the 7 to 8% range. That's typically where I see it in a school district. And that's for everything else. That's for textbooks, copiers, everything you can buy that's not covered in those kind of necessary payments above. All fall within that 10% window. So you can see a significant piece of our budget. We are a people business. We're not making widgets, so we're heavily invested in people and staff to teach our kids. Next slide. How do we compare? So I just picked some districts. I picked Portland Public and Salem Kaiser because they're larger. And then I picked Tigard Tualatin, Westland, Wilsonville, and Hillsborough because they're kind of in the metro area. This is an interesting one, and these are based on 2017, 2018 actual expenditures, audited actual expenditures. And this first graph shows you how we compare across those districts in terms of the number on the top is the overall spending for the district. So you can see Portland Public spends a little over $1,000 more per student than we do. They spend $12,213, and we're just below that at $11,130. When you look at how those expenditures are comprised, you see instruction is the green, and what each district is spending per student on instruction. In blue is the support services, and again the total across the top. There's a note to the left that enterprise and community services and just some other functions are left off because they're not huge numbers. But for our benefit here, you see Beaverton School District spends more on instruction than any of our comparator districts that I've included. So this is another one where you say, wow, Beaverton, you have way too many administrators, you know, way too much fluff going on in the district, not enough focus on instruction. This is a graph you can look at and say, actually, we spend more on instruction than any of our neighbors. So it's kind of an interesting takeaway. This is how we compare on actual expenditures by object. So by object, we mean salaries and benefits, purchase services, supplies, materials, other objects, and the total. You can see, again, we're right near $10,000 per student on salaries and benefits. We have $599 per student on purchase services, $417 on supplies and materials for our overall $11,130. Again, we are right in there in terms of, we're similar to Portland Public in terms of what we spend on salary and benefits. And kind of across the board, we look fairly similar. Okay. This is reserves and fund balance. So you can see the reserves. This is again as of 17-18. We're in that 6% range there on the left. We've got company with Hillsborough and Portland Public in that same range. Salem Kaiser at 10.5, Tiger Tualatin at a little over 15.5, and Westland Wilsonville at 8.57. Oh, we got a question. Sarah.
There. How do our salaries compare to those districts? I mean, do we pay higher? I mean, what makes up that percentage of that portion? How do we pay our teachers in comparison to those districts?
So I think we're fairly similar to Portland Public. I mean, I think we've gone back and forth over the years. I'm not sure where we are this year. I can get an answer for you on that. I'll check with Sue in HR to see where we are with those comparators. But we're fairly high, and it's between us and Portland Public usually in terms of highest top salary. Does that make sense, Sarah? Okay. So back to this screen in terms of reserves. This also on the far left for Beaverton shows us at 6.12. That did not include the long-term planning fund that we had at the end of 17-18. So there was a little over 20 million more. That would have put us up in closer to the 10% range at that year, had that number been included. So just in terms of full transparency, we were actually a little higher in 17-18. Next. Oh, we're on to Jenny Hansman.
Good evening. Glad to be here. I am going to talk a little bit about the student investment account along with the staffing allocation methodology. As most of you know, we started out the year very excited about the student investment account. We had a significant community outreach. We had convenings with a lot of our stakeholders from the community, administrators, teachers, and received a ton of feedback. We had surveys that went out. All of our stakeholders were able to provide input on what those resources could be used for. We were looking at a $32 million investment to be able to purchase resources and to make sure that we had all of that in our budget. 50% of the Student Success Act is the SIA, so it is the student investment account. And the preliminary estimate was $32.7 million in the 2021 budget. There were 4 buckets that Beaverton and all districts were able to use it for. Those 4 buckets are listed here. They were for expanded learning time, health and safety, well-rounded curriculum, and lower class size or more adults. Those 4 buckets, like I said, we had tons of input from our stakeholders in all of these areas to see how we could better serve our students. So one of the criteria was that we must meet the students' mental and behavioral needs, and at the same time increase students' academic achievement and reduce disparities for our focal populations. So those are the 2 areas that we really focused in our time with, which on the next slide you will see how it fared out once we received that feedback and once our convenings were meeting together to figure out where we were going to invest. You'll see that the key areas in investment are in the pie chart. The first one was in the blue. You'll see is the equity focused instructional investment, and that was approximately 14.4 million. The other big one was you'll see it in the green, is the student success teams. And that's for both mental and behavioral supports for students. And that's at 16.8 million. The smaller investments were under equity-based systems improvement, which you'll see in the orange at 1 million. And then a smaller cut of it is the allowable indirect costs, which is 0.5 million. And the next slide will show a breakdown of all of those investments. This was our tier 1 plan. After we took the input, after we had the convenings, we had our teams get together and have some preliminary plans of what that budget will look for in the coming year. And you'll see on this chart, starts with our class size K2 and the equity-based classroom investment, which I'm going to talk more about in the SAM model. But those were the highest, along with the student success teams, which is in the middle of this graph. The student success teams consist of our social emotional learning, behavioral learning, our MLD work, along with some para support for behavior as well. As many of you know, our schools are working really hard on behavioral issues that we're experiencing more so in the last 5 years than I think we ever have. So you'll see a big chunk be going to that. Up above, you will see professional development for literacy, both in dyslexia and assessments. I won't read each one, but as you look at it, you'll see library materials, you'll see more ELD teachers to reduce caseloads. And further on down, you'll notice that we have a significant amount for K-12 equity training, equity TOSA, an HR administrator for equity under talent acquisition, discretionary, and a community liaison. So all of that are things that we came up with in our tier 1 planning for the Student Investment Act. Very excited to see the investments in all of these areas. As well as on the next slide, you'll see what we call our staffing allocation methodology. SAM has been a part of our district for years. It's how we staff our schools and making sure that we allocate to appropriate areas. This year, we made a change, and it was really a significant change in our SAM model. We haven't intentionally called out poverty in our SAM model in the last few years, so really wanted to make that change. We had a committee that met for around 6 months to come up with, this committee was made up of many administrators in our district that have been dealing with our staffing for many years, and came up with the change. As you'll see here, there's 3 bullets here that are really important because the way we allocate to schools need to take into consideration the fact that our students that are living in poverty require greater support than other students. All schools, all of our schools need to serve students living in poverty. And finally, all schools should receive funding to support the academic and social emotional needs of students living in poverty. So what we did, with knowing that we all had a core belief and core values around those three areas, wanted to make sure that our resources were equitable in that area. So the second bullet, you'll see that we took the percentage of students who are eligible for free and reduced meals was used to determine a weighted enrollment number. The weighted enrollment was used to allocate classroom teachers at all levels and counselors at the secondary level. It was the weight at secondary was a 0.5 and at elementary was 0.25. The next slide, I think, shows, oops, nope. So we can go back, David, just because I want to end on the, thanks, sorry about that. Making sure that everybody realizes the extent and the thought that went into changing this model and how important it is for our kids of poverty. And so in our schools next year, you'll see a shift in resources that will model what this SAM model looks like. That's it.
And it looks like we have a couple of questions. And what pages or section in our budget doc can we access the SIA details? If you're looking for the numbers details, it's for Fund 270. I don't have the page number right in front of me, but when Jessica goes through the document, she can direct you towards that. The next question is, in the likelihood that this fund shrinks, is it list in priority order for spending, or would you shrink all line items equally? We have been having that discussion. You should all remember that part of what we're doing here is we had essentially a structural deficit in our budget, and part of these funds was to maintain the class sizes that we have. In fact, about half of the SIA was maintaining existing programs and doing things that the SIA suggested we should do that we as a district were already doing. So that we move some dollars over. And my guess is at this point, there's a strong likelihood that we'd want to maintain those existing programs that we've had. But again, that has yet to be completely determined.
And I see Heidi has a question.
Yeah, just real quick. Thank you for the clarification, Michael, about so it's the 270 grant fund. And I see that it's broken into elementary, middle, high. The district makes the determination as to how it's broken up. We get the lump sum from the SIA, and then through our outreach and decision making, then that's how it's allocated between elementary, middle, and high school. Is that correct?
So that's how we've done it, Heidi. David, if you want to jump on and talk a little bit about where we are in the process in terms of the board's approved this as well, and where we go from here, that might help, Heidi.
Sure, absolutely. And just I think Mike mentioned it, but the Fund 270 encompasses more than just the SIA. But as you get into the budget doc and you see the jump from last year to this proposed, the big chunk is the 32 million in the student investment account. The measure itself, the Student Success Act, required districts to go through a fairly significant outreach process to develop their grant application, their proposal for how to spend these funds within the parameters of the measure. We will provide for you the slideshow and the report that we presented to the board. At the end of that process, districts were required to get the plan approved by their school board and then submitted to the Department of Ed. The board approved that, seems like 387 years ago, but it was just at the end of February. So shocking amount of time has passed since then. It is in the hands of the Department of Ed. They are reviewing it to make sure it aligns with the requirements in the Student Success Act, and then we'll bring that back to the district, whereby we will then negotiate over the metrics for accountability and goal setting process. But we were sort of hoping to have that back to us by now, but I think the department, like everybody, is adjusting to new timelines as they grapple with distance work in this environment as well. But it is currently in the hands of the department, however, having been approved already by the Beaverton School Board. Did that cover what you wanted, Heidi?
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
You bet.
I believe Sarah has a question as well. Sarah?
Yeah, I was wondering for when we were talking about the allocations of where the money is able to go. I noticed on page 41 of the budget document under the pillar of equity, there's significant additions to that reduction in the social emotional learning, but it looks like culturally relevant practices got allocated a lot more and some subcategories there. Is the SAI, is that where that money was coming from?
Yeah, that's where you see the bulk of that increase is through the SIA, correct?
Okay. So kind of thinking if that doesn't come through fully, that was definitely one of the areas that we would have to be adjusting.
Yep, and it will be. I mean, we'll get into that a little later, but it will be an area that will be adjusted down.
I do want to add one little bit, just because this is me editorializing, because I know some of us have spent a lot of years devoting our life's work to bringing about adequate and stable funding for schools in Oregon. And it feels like the world gave us the greatest curveball ever by throwing this pandemic at us just at the time at which we got some progress in the legislature. But if there is a silver lining, it is one that we learned really important lessons about how to better engage our community when having conversations around needs of our students, specifically of our historically underrepresented students who have not traditionally had a voice in the district. And then the other is that the Student Success Act and the corporate activities tax are permanent. And when we do come out of this, both the health crisis as well as the economic recession as a result of it, that will be there providing an ongoing stable base for education. So I think there are some positives to take away once we get through this. This is a revenue source that will return and provide strategic investments for districts.
Thank you, David. And I would say, to me, it felt like a little bit like Lucy pulling the football, Charlie Brown. Next slide, David, I think. Okay, we'll get into the numbers here and have a little bit of a discussion about kind of where we're at and where we've been. This is a nice little chart that kind of shows our actual enrollment in the green bars over time up to 2020, 2021. So you can see we are budgeting just a few more students than we had this year. And primarily, actually, we're a bit of a decline because a lot of that increase is going to our charter schools. But in terms of overall numbers, we're a little bit above where we were this year. You can see the orange line is our special education bar. You can see ELL in gray, students in poverty in yellow. Students in poverty, that went down quite a bit in 18-19. It has since come back up a little bit, and it'll be interesting to see again how this economic COVID-19 deal is going to affect where we are moving forward. And you can see charter enrollment growing moderately and modestly over that same time period. Next slide. There we go. So here's just a nice little snapshot of what our enrollment has been, or what we projected it to be, what the number of classroom teachers are, other licensed staff, classified administrators, and then the total staff at the bottom. So just a nice handy summary for you to kind of see what's going on in terms of where our folks are. Again, Jessica will get into a little more detail here as we roll into her section here in a little bit. Okay, this is probably new for you. I don't know a lot of business officials that present their budget this way, but this is a financial update that I did in the middle of March that helped inform our budget in terms of what our beginning fund balance would be. So I want to take a few minutes on this just so you can see it. This is something I'll show you every year. And in fact, what it'll do every year is it'll create a bit of a scorecard on my projection so that we can come back the following year and say, all right, Mike, where were you right? Where were you wrong? And what were the reasons for the adjustment? So part of my accountability to you will be to say, here's my estimate. And then the following year to say, here's where we actually ended up. So you can kind of get a picture of where we're at as a district. On the far left, you see our resources, and I have it in three big pools there. We have our beginning fund balance, our state controlled dollars. And when I say state controlled, again, essentially what I mean there is the state school fund. One of the things we get wrapped up in is, yes, we do collect local property taxes, and those, are going up 3 to 4 to 5% depending on the year. But those are a part of the state school fund. If we actually collect less than we anticipated, the state would make that up. If we collect more, we return that to the state. So again, that's part of the state school fund. You see down below that our locally controlled dollars. And so in 17-18, we're at $484 million. Below that, I break it into essentially three lines. Three important lines for me: salaries, benefits, and then everything else. So you see in that year, our total expenditures were $454,684,000. That left us an ending fund balance of $29.6 million. In the long-term planning fund, we had, as I mentioned earlier on that earlier graph, we had 20.6 or almost $20.7 million. So total effective reserves in 17-18 were a little over 50 million. Does that make sense to everybody so far? Good. Okay, raise your hand if you need to. And then for comparison, we put in 18-19. Then we put in the adopted budget, what was adopted in 19-20 last year. For those of you that weren't new, that's the budget that was adopted. Then next to that, you see my projection that I currently have in place. And then you see the proposed budget out further than that. So if you looked around here, and let's just take resources for a second, and let's look, the state controlled resources, those are just kind of moving along, right? And they're growing, but they're growing at a, kind of reasonable rate as they grow across the top. If you look at locally controlled, you see 50 million, then 56 million, and then boom, all of a sudden there's 72 million. And that makes you say, well, what was that? Well, that is the one-time transfer we did from the long-term planning fund. Those were those reserves that we moved in last year to help create that bridge to the SIA. So that's why that number jumps up so much in 19-20. And you see it going back down in 2020, 2021. On the expenditure side, you see salaries, and you go across 262, 272. We adopted 267. Again, that was the shortfall year. My projection for this year is a little over that at 269 million. And our proposed budget next year is 276 million. So again, not super exciting, although it did go down in 19-20 for the budget. It's actually up from that a couple $1 million. On the benefit side, this one's interesting, right? So if you look at the far left in 17-18, we're 145.5 million spent on benefits. Our proposed budget for next year is 176.7 million. That's a pretty significant increase, right? And I'm sure you talked about it last year, but that's primarily PERS. It's all benefits that are included in there, all associated payroll costs. But the primary driver of that dollar going up so much and taking up a significant portion of our resources is because of PERS. Look at the all other going across, and you see that's in the 47, 45, 49, again, 48, and I'm up to 56 in 2020, 2021. About 4 million of the dollars that's driving that is a lease with Apple. So we account for the entire lease up front, even though we pay it over time. So that number we would anticipate would go down next year if we don't have another lease next year. So we're accounting for a lease there, and that's kind of a one-time deal that makes that number go up. You see the reserves, and you kind of see where we would end the 2021 year at just over $30 million, again, pre-COVID, right? Questions coming. What do we have? Let me check it out here. Okay, so Miles, under benefits was the increase in healthcare estimated for next year. We had estimated, so it's kind of an interesting estimate, right? Because we have a cap, but we have a significant number of folks that are actually below that cap. So we've got a budget somewhere in the neighborhood of 4% for health insurance increases, because that's what we think we will pay. There's not a, like I say, there's not a lot of folks that have reached that cap yet. So most of that cost will come straight to us. Does that make sense, Miles? All right, I'll move on. Does PERS number take into account crash and stock? Not most recently. So here's the interesting thing about PERS, which drives people crazy, including me. The valuation that they use will be based on the 2019 returns, which again, were decent in the, I think they were in the 13-ish% range. And that valuation of 2019 will inform our rates that we begin paying in the 2021-22 school year, and actually for that 2021-2023 biennium. So we could be in a situation, we've done this before as a state, where the year after the valuation, we have a big stock market correction. There are significant losses from PERS, and yet at the same time, our PERS rate goes down the next year because it's based on the prior year valuation. PERS they may make some change to that. The legislature could certainly make some change to that. But we could be in this unfortunate situation where we know our unfunded liability is growing should the stock market not return to a positive number by the end of this year, and yet at the same time see our rates go down, which is, again, very hard for me to explain, and I'll be sitting in front of you a year from now trying to make sense of that for you. But great question. Let's see, on the assumption side, it was based on our most recent ODE state school fund updates for all the way out to 2020, 2021. We'll get into this when we have the COVID discussion. But essentially speaking, the most recent information I have was the 25th or 26th of February. That's the most recent I have for the 2020, 2021 budget in terms of what the state school fund would be. We know it will not be that. We've seen all the numbers. We just don't know what it is yet. It also includes the most recent enrollment adjustments for 18-19, 19-20, and as you saw, fairly flat enrollment for 2020, 2021. We had a reasonable estimate in there for COLA, for bargaining with all groups. I don't know where that goes given where we are. Did not include new SIA funds in these numbers. You're looking at general fund only. Does not include high school success or Measure 98. And again, does not factor in impacts from COVID-19. And it was based on the best information I had kind of mid-March when we were trying to put the budget to bed. Next slide. Okay, now we'll get into COVID-19, probably what's on everybody's mind. What do we know? We know it's an unprecedented time. We know that 2021 budget will be negatively impacted. We know that we already are in record unemployment claims. We have passed in 3 weeks' time what the highest unemployment rate was for the state of Oregon through the Great Recession that began in 2008, 2009. So if you want a glimpse, to get there in 3 weeks is absolutely breathtaking. Well, what are we doing? So we've spent some money due to the governor's order to deal with, some of the healthcare issues and some of the issues of getting our schools cleaned and just some of the various issues around the governor's order. The other area where we're spending a little bit of money is in distance learning. Steve Langford would happily remind me that thanks to the bond issue that was passed in 2014 and some other good stewardship, we were in a fairly decent spot for being able to transition to distance learning fairly quickly. So kudos to the district for making these investments and getting us ready. Spending and hiring restrictions. So as Don mentioned, the spending restriction that went into place. I think the governor's order was around the 16th. I think by the 17th or 18th, we had the spending restriction in place. Hiring restriction is now in place. We are still hiring for some of those hard to fill positions that we know we're going to have, regardless of where the reductions are. But other than that, we put a freeze on hiring. Any hiring or any job posting is currently going to the superintendent's cabinet for approval to be posted. Again, what we are looking at these record unemployment claims, we are paying those claims. So as people make those claims, we'll be writing those checks. So we'll be watching to see how that's going to affect our district and seeing if our insurance reserve fund needs a little more money this year. We're also analyzing and implementing cost savings measures. I've asked for spending plans through the rest of the year from all of our cabinet folks. We're working on that right now in terms of the format and the timing of getting that done. But we have started to take a look at what we need to do for cost savings. So what do we need to know? This is the hard part. I mean, I know you can imagine you're looking at a budget, and we've already said it's not a budget that we'll likely implement. Here's what we need to know. We need to know both the state and district impact of the Federal CARES Act, just even the first round. What's coming to our school district? What can we count on? What's coming to our state to help backfill state expenditures that they've had and lack of revenue? So that's the first thing we need to know. The next thing we need to know is the initial impact on state revenue. That forecast is May 20th. So we'll get some idea of what the state economists think in terms of where we are headed. That will not be the last opportunity. Remember, they'll meet quarterly. I think their next meeting will be towards the end of September, where they will provide another forecast. And I believe that's why the governor has not called a special session and why she had waited, is because we need to know what that forecast is going to look like, because it will be the legislature's job to then balance the budget. And as we mentioned, what that legislative response will be is unknown at this point. And in addition to that, I would say that, I was kind of paying attention over the weekend. Looks like the next round of federal spending is coming, but there's nothing in it for the states yet, which is interesting. I also heard one of the president's economic advisors say, we realize the states have some issues and that would be in consideration in the next round of federal spending. So that's kind of what we need to know before we can get our budget actually put together. Next slide. Here's some scenarios. These are very rough estimates. Please don't take these to the bank. But this is kind of what we put together on the back of a napkin to say, all right, if the state general fund, and if it was allocated proportionally as it is now, $1 billion, and I think Dawn mentioned this early on, $1 billion reduction to the state general fund is about $25.5 million for Beaverton School District. At $2 billion, it's $51 million. At $3 billion, it's $76.5 million. I think the worst recent budget shortfall that the district went through was a reduction in the neighborhood of $34 million. So, and I think that was back in 2012, if I remember correctly. So these are significant in terms of the impact to our district. At 25.5 on a $500 million budget, that's a big number. You're talking about 5% reductions, 10%, somewhere in that neighborhood, maybe a little less than that, but those are big percentage reductions for our district. When folks asked about the student investment account and what we have going on there, we are looking at what a 50% reduction would mean, and it's about 16.1 million for our district, and what a 75% reduction would mean. That would mean 24.2 of the 32.7 for our district. So again, significant numbers that we need to consider. We're also getting some guidance on the High School Success Act, Measure 98. We're going to look at a 30% reduction there. If you may recall, the High School Success or Measure 98 funds this year in the 1920 school year was funded with the idea that the Student Success Act funds would backfill that. So the funds weren't here yet. And a little bit of the state school fund was the same way. A little bit of backfill from the Student Success Act was used for the state school fund as well. So we're looking at what reductions that we might need to consider under those Measure 98 funds. Next. Okay, so we looked at the kind of reduction piece. Now we ought to look at what could happen from a backfill perspective. I've heard like maybe we got to look at 70% of our Title I. That would put us on the low end of that $4 to $8 million range. I've also seen it would just be a straight allocation, which would put us, if we got 100% of that, closer to the $8 million range. But we do not know yet. We do not know exactly what will be sent on to Beaverton School District from the Federal CARES Act. As I mentioned, other federal dollars from the state or for the state out of the Federal CARES Act is in there as well. The silver lining again is that this state is in a better position than we were in 2008, 2009. There were no reserves. The cupboards were bare back in 08, 09. Currently, the reserves are somewhere in the $1.8 to $2 billion range as a state. If again, they allocated that on a proportional basis, the entire $2 billion, that would be about $51 million to us. So that just is to give you a little bit of background and context in terms of what we think we're facing and what we think we'll be building in terms of potential reduction scenarios moving forward. Next. This is a graph that I just pulled off of the State Economist. It's called the Office of Economic Analysis at the State of Oregon. They have a blog that I often refer to and spend a lot of time looking at what they're thinking. This is about a week or maybe 10 days old. This was something they were looking at and considering. They called it the square root recovery, where we drop way down, we get an initial bounce back, so that once we get some of our folks back to work and working and get some business happening, and then they kind of show two scenarios where the growth path depends on pent-up demand and the amount of permanent damage and policy moving forward. So that's just a very preliminary look at a scenario, not the scenario, but a scenario that could happen moving forward. We'll continue to track what the State Economist is looking at and thinking about, but again, we won't know till May 20th. Next. Okay, what are our next steps? The administration is currently bargaining with all groups. So we've got that to do. And we have shared with them all the uncertainty that we have going forward and a little bit about the depth of the impact. We'll be having more discussions with them moving forward. We've got planned bargaining sessions coming up. Next, spending plans for 1920. I mentioned that earlier. I've asked for spending plans from our cabinet to give us some idea of what emergency spending we need between now and the end of the year. So we take a careful and close look at that. And we're also beginning to develop our budget reduction scenarios. For you as a budget committee, you need to receive and review public input. And my question back to you is, what do you need to know? What questions do you have that you need answered before you're ready to vote? So that's kind of your next steps. Our next meeting is May 4th, and it'll likely be virtual again. Next slide. So comments and questions for me. This is a chance to catch my breath, and you can play Stump the CFO.
Has a comment?
I have a comment. Thank you, Michael and Jessica, as well, and your team for putting together this budget. I know it's unprecedented as we keep hearing that word. I just also, I really want to recognize, I don't know that I have a specific question, but I want to recognize the work of the entire district, whether it's administrators. I know we have folks on YouTube who are likely either family, parents, students, teachers, staff. The work of the district is, we recognize that, and many of us are parents here on this budget committee, so we all take this very personally and hope to do our best to move forward a budget that we know is going to have to go through some change over the summer months and into the next year. I guess I do have one question, and it may not be anything that could be addressed right now, but maybe this is for David, as if we go into a special session, if there are things that we can be advocating for. I know the board has, and you, David, have been great about reaching out to our legislators, but what we as well as budget committee members could do to support those efforts. And I also want to recognize the work of Jenny and Maureen and team for the community conversations that you put out. I was able to attend a couple of them and they were very well attended. And I'm really pleased to see that folks in the community were providing input into how we move forward with SIA. You know, just this time last year, we didn't know if this was going to be a reality for us to see the student success come to fruition, and it did. And David, thank you for your analogy of this is a curveball, but we'll keep pushing through. So that would be all I have to say there.
Yeah, I'm happy to chime in. I'll keep it short. And I'm starting to forget what a curveball is because there's no baseball on, and I desperately miss that. So the question of sort of what to advocate for in a special session, honestly, right now, I don't know. I think Mike adequately laid out a lot of the sort of unknowns as we head towards a possible special session, how they'll spend federal money, how they will use existing state reserves, which, by the way, are healthier than they've been at any pre-recessionary times in the past, and how they will respond to the interplay of the SIA, Measure 98, and the state school fund. These are all sort of balls in the air. I think at this point, as much as we love our proposal in the SIA, I think we would be advocating that we maintain what exists now just to get through this crisis. So maintaining the state school fund as whole as possible at the $9 billion, which, by the way, 200 million of that came from the corporate activities tax. So depending on what is there or not, and maintaining the Measure 98 funding as all of that is on the ground being spent currently. So I think our goal would be to maintain those investments where they're at, and then build a bridge towards some next step. But I think the question, as we're waiting to hear from the state economists, is how long is it going to take us to get to that next step? The square root recovery piece, what does the back end look like? Are we talking an 18-month recovery, or are we talking a 5-year recovery? I think those are sort of the wild cards we have to wait to know before we know really what the ask will be for the legislature.
Thank you, Heidi and David. I believe our next question is from Susan.
So first of all, I just want to thank everyone for the amazing passion and compassion that all of you have had through this unbelievable time. But my question is we're sitting here looking at a budget that most likely will not be our budget next year. And more of my questions would revolve around the unknown questions that we won't know until a month from now. But the next meeting we have is May 4th for a budget that is most likely not going to be realistic for next year.
Yeah, Susan.
It's more of a comment than it is a question, but it is a little.
So, yeah, I get where you're coming from. That's the uncomfortable position we're in, is we don't know what the impacts are going to be. And again, we will get a forecast on May 20th. I don't believe that will tell us where we are at that point. We'll know what the projected shortfall is, but we won't necessarily know what the legislature plans to do with it, right? And the legislature then is going to meet, and they're going to talk about their own reserves at that point in terms of what they are comfortable with allocating, I would guess. And it may be some, it may be not much. It'll be kind of dependent on, again, what that state economist says in terms of how they're feeling about that forecast. And then in addition to that, they're going to be looking to the feds. And if the feds haven't met again and come up with some kind of funding for states, they'll be hoping for that. As I recall, when this played out in the 2008-2009 year, we did not know our funding until mid to late July. That was when we actually figured out, okay, this is what the state school fund is going to be based on, and this is where we're headed. So the problem is we have this law that says we need to have a budget in place by June 30th. And so that's kind of why we're going through this. Again, if we had more knowledge and certainty around where we think we're headed, we'd be sharing that now. Does that help?
I think Tom has a question as well.
Thanks, Denise. If there's time for questions at the end, then I can withdraw it until Jessica's finished with her presentation.
We'll have time for more questions.
Great.
Sarah, did you have a question you wanted to ask now?
What exactly was Jessica putting? What was her presentation?
She's going to walk through the components of the budget document itself and refer you to some pages so you kind of have some familiarity with it.
Okay. Yeah, I wanted to make a comment. And I think my question, I'll go ahead and ask my question now for you, Michael. So first of all, I just want to say thank you to all staff and administration. As two kids I have two kids in the system, and we've, the transition has been bumpy, but it has been good, and everyone's, I hear things from the front line, from other families too and stuff. So we appreciate everything that everyone has done so far. I know this has been very hard on teachers. It's that word, unprecedented. Everyone's, been very patient, been very kind, and we're all just trying to help each other out here. So my main, in thinking in those terms, and you had mentioned unemployment claims. What do we look like across the board as far as, who have we had to unemploy people? I mean, obviously our teachers are still under their contract and still getting paid, but what does this look like across our district for classified and licensed employees?
So generally speaking, Sarah, we are paying all regular employees currently. So we're paying our licensed and our classified folks. The area where we've had more question is around our substitutes. We've been paying some long-term subs, but not the occasional subs. So that's where we're getting some claims and where we'll get some claims moving forward. But under the governor's order, we're to pay all of our regular folks their wages. So we've been doing that.
Okay, so our custodians, our nutrition services, I mean, those have all been, they're still fully being employed. Okay, that's great. Okay, yeah, that's my main question for right now.
Thank you, Sarah.
Donna, did you have a question at this time?
Yes, and I'm not sure if I missed it or not, but of course I echo everybody and thanking the staff for all their hard work. But I know that we're starting the year at a deficit, which is going to impact all of our numbers. And it wasn't necessarily, at least in my mind, called out in, I know the Student Success Act money that we're going to get, but as far as the bottom line for that, I guess we won't have to worry about that at this point, but I know it's all still guessing, but what sort of deficit, again, are we starting out at that we're going to have to reflect in the revised budget downward, since we're possibly going to be getting less money, if this is all making sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. And just to be clear about that, we made some initial reductions at the cabinet level this winter. So we made some budget reductions there to help with the deficit. Certainly didn't, we did some reductions there. Most of what we did was through the SIA. The SIA was, remember when the district brought the reserves out of the long-term planning fund and used those, the idea was that was a bridge to get us to this year coming up with the SIA. So our deficit based on the budget we have was eliminated. The problem is the budget we have won't be the budget we implement next fall.
Thank you. Those were all the questions that were submitted through the chat. I did have one question. On the last slide, or the second to last slide, you talked about one of the next steps going forward is to talk about some budget reduction scenarios. And I was just wondering if that was something that was going to be done in time for our next meeting and something that we would hear about before the May 4th budget meeting.
It probably won't be finalized, Chair, before the next meeting. And in fact, we want to be careful with how we roll out our budget reductions. I've been in this scenario before where we have decided as a district, we think this is the number. So we roll out some great big, large reduction that turns out to not be true because the state came back and backfilled. Then we cause a lot of communication problems, confusion, and some real angst in our own system. We'll probably roll out the reductions when we have an idea of the number and get some input at that point. The problem is, I think it's going to be late in the game.
Understandable. Thank you so much. If there aren't any further questions at this time, I think we will turn the time over to Jessica Jones. All right, Jessica.
Okay, I'm Jessica Jones. I'm the budget manager, and this is the 11th budget that I have worked on for the district. I'm going to go through a little bit of the budget document and how it's set up and some of the main components of it. You all should have received a budget document, I believe last Wednesday. And there is also an electronic version on the district's website on the annual budget page. The budget document has 4 main sections. It's the executive summary, an organizational summary, a financial summary, and an informational summary. Next slide. Okay, in the executive summary, it's basically meant to just be a liftable standalone document. So it gives a lot of high level financial data. In the adopted version, this is where the superintendent's budget message would be. We have enrollment history and projections, and we provide really high level information about salaries and benefits, the positions we have for all funds. It doesn't break it out by general fund versus grant funds or nutrition services or anything like that. It's just all funds. Next slide. And so this is one of the pieces that I think is helpful in the budget document. It's found on page 6, and it's a summary of budget for every single year for 5 years. And it has all of the funds. So you can see the individual funds and you can see all funds total. Next slide. And following that on page 7, there's some information. So it shows the total salaries and benefits for the whole district, all funds, for 3 years of actual data and 2 years of budget. We have budget for the current year, the 2019-20 year, as well as next year for the proposed, and the same information for positions. And it has a little bit about really high level why we've made these shifts. For this particular page in the 2021 budget, there is a reference to the student investment account, which is where a lot of that increase was coming from. Next. The next is the organizational section. This has a lot of information about the district, the school board, administrative staff. It has a lot of the strategic measures of student success, which are usually reported to the board in the winter work session. As well as overall budget process and financial reporting information and a multi-year investment summary. I don't believe I actually pulled any pages from this because it's a lot of narrative. It's a lot of narrative all the way through. And so there is a summary towards the end of it about the multi-year investment summaries, which kind of breaks it down. I think that Sarah referenced it earlier, where we break down the investments by pillar. And it references further on into the informational section where we have more detailed information on those investments. Next slide.
financial section, it's exactly what it sounds like. It has a lot of summary and detail level financial information for all funds. So it does some rolled up all funds information. It breaks it down a little bit more into what we consider operating funds. And then it goes into detail, financial detail for every single individual fund that we have. It has a variance analysis. We do budgeted positions where we compare the general fund positions for the 2019-20 adopted budget to the 2021 proposed budget by function. So you can see some differences there. And it also includes some debt and capital projects information. Next. So here's a little screenshot of the variance analysis. It's on pages 56 through 58 in your 2021 proposed document. And here we break it down by individual fund. The criteria for each variance is listed below the sections. And then if there is a variance from the 2019-20 adopted budget, we'll explain what that variance is on these pages. It is important to note that these are budget to budget comparisons. They are not in any way showing our actual 2019-20 expenditures or a projection. It is our adopted budget to our proposed budget. And I know this one is really hard to read, and it's just kind of so you can see what it is supposed to look like. It's on page 77. It's the general fund budgeted positions. And so what we do here is we show, again, budget to budget information for the current year and the proposed budget year by classification. So you have your certified, your classified, your non-represented, and your administrators. And it's broken down by function, so you can see where they all fall. So in the first, so what you will notice is that on the first part of it, it talks about it has the certified and the classified information, but there is no non-represented or administrators in that first part because that is all direct classroom instruction, whereas those would fall into the support services, which is below it. And off to the right, there's also the amount, the number of students that each of these levels serve. So the first line is for elementary programs. And so the expenditures there would only impact the elementary students, and it'll show the percentage of the budget. And the last section is the informational section. And I know that I've pulled a lot more screenshots from this section. It just has a lot of different tables and graphs and information. We look at the staffing by school. We look at staffing by fund and by function. We have detailed enrollment history and projections. This is where your staffing allocation methodology is included, as well as school summary pages, performance measures for the district, and then more detailed reports on those strategic investments. Next. So this document, it is probably familiar to some of you who have been on the budget committee in the past. We've changed it a little bit this year, which is why I wanted to call this one in particular out. It's our ratio teacher staffing. In the past, it has just shown what was the general fund teachers and then what the impact of the local option levy was. And this year with some of our classroom teachers budgeted in the student investment account, we thought it was important to show the differences all the way through general fund, what the levy does for each school, and then what the student investment account was planned to do for each school. And for this one, it's important to note that this is a cumulative amount. So if you're looking at the first school and you see 42.5 teachers with SIA, and then the levy is 39.5, you have to do a little math to get there. Next. The personnel resource allocations, pages 235 through 236, breaks down the actuals for 3 years and 2 years of budget by classification and by job code. So you can not only get into, this doesn't have functions on it, so you can not only get into your classified or certified or administrators, you can get into what job code it is. So this example on the screen has classified, so you can see how many crossing guards or how many bus drivers are budgeted, for example. Next. And this is an example of the school summary pages. There's one for every school that we have. It has a lot of the different information, enrollment, history, projections. It has staffing information. It has the financial data. It has some demographic data that is not shown on this screen here, but it's on every single school, different performance measurements, and they are all listed for every school. And so you can see individual schools if you're interested in that. And I did not pull a screenshot of it, but I believe there was a question about it. So beginning on pages 252 up until the school summary pages, that's where you'll find the staffing allocation methodology, which reflects all of the changes that Jenny referenced earlier in all of the work that the SAM committee did this fall and winter. And next. And this is an example of a strategic investment report. And it starts on page 329, and it basically finishes out the document until the glossary. And it is also broken down by pillar and then by actual investment. It has an annual investment, the students served, what the measures of success are for each investment in a little bit more detail. And there is some information here about some of the student investment account investments as well. Next. Okay, that's it.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is to review public comment. There is a link on this slide that shows where you can access all information about the budget document itself. There is a link to submit questions, and we'll have another round of questions before our next meeting. These are the questions that have been submitted so far. And Jessica, could you just explain to everyone how and when the questions will be answered by the budget team?
Sure. These questions were asked on our Google form that is listed on our webpage between April 9th, the day that the meeting was published, and the 17th. And these questions are presented to you as these are the comments, and we will bring these back with, to the next meeting on May 4th with answers for the budget committee, and then they will also be posted on that webpage that's listed there.
Thank you, Jessica.
There was also, I just want to make note that there was one other question that came in through here, and it was not, I don't believe, meant for the budget. It has to do with grading, and we have forwarded that on to the teaching and learning department.
Great, thank you. While we're talking about it, I was just wondering if you knew the date to submit comment for our next meeting.
So it is open right now on that webpage, and we will take anything until May 2nd, which will give us a little time to prepare it for the May 4th meeting. Those questions will not be answered for the May 4th meeting. They will just be presented like this. And then we would bring back answers to the next meeting on May 18th, I believe.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone on the board or this budget committee have questions about these particular public comments at this time? Okay. Next on our agenda is questions from the committee. This is going to be a little different than the way we usually do it, since we are not sitting around a table together to go around the room. So if anyone on the budget committee has general questions, and know that you can submit your questions via our Google document at a later date if you'd prefer. But if you do have questions, if you would just chime in on the chat or raise your hand, and we will go in order of the questions. Tom, did you want to go first? Did you still have a question?
Thanks. Yeah, two questions about the staffing allocation model. My first question is, what is the goal that the new staffing allocation model is trying to achieve? Are we attempting to support low SES students who may not receive as many resources at high SES schools? Or are we trying to provide more resources at schools where low SES students are concentrated, or both? So I'll ask these questions one at a time.
Thank you, Tom. Jenny, do you want to weigh in on this?
Yes. Let's see, both of those are pretty correct. In one of the slides, I think I went over all of the three things that it's looking for. So students living in poverty, we want them to have greater support, and so that each school, the kids that are in poverty, have that support. So in answer to your question, it is actually both, I believe. And that was your second question, Tom, right?
No, that's the first one.
That's the first one. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Can you read your second one then?
Well, just as a follow-up to the first one, it may be helpful to take a look at how you would have allocated teachers previous to this change in the model, and then this change in the model, and to see what that effect is over the entire system. That's not something that can be like readily put available, but I would like to request that before the next budget committee session to better understand how we're meeting both of those goals.
Right. I actually think we have that available. We used it for the SAM committee, so I would imagine, I'm speaking for Jessica, but we can find that information for you to show the differences. Yeah.
Then
Can I clarify really quickly on that? Tom, are you looking to know what would have happened to the district if we hadn't changed the model versus what happened with?
Exactly.
Okay.
And what are the net pluses and minuses, school by school, so that we can kind of like, I can see what you guys are trying to achieve, and I understand the goal now that you've answered that question. And I'm interested relative to that goal, what does it actually look like? What are the net pluses and minuses across the system?
Got it. Yeah.
And Tom, I just weigh in with a kind of a general perspective. Overall class size through the district was budgeted to be about the same for next year, but where you saw increases would be at a school with not a lot of poverty, and even if they were growing, they could actually have class sizes increasing. Where you saw class sizes going down, it was at those high poverty schools. Again, even if they might be shrinking a little bit, they could get some additional resource. That's a broad generalization, but I wanted to let you know that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And then second question, there are vice principal positions that are being eliminated at Chehalem, Barnes, and El Monica, and then added at Oak Hills, Raleigh Hills, Shoals Heights, and Sexton Mountain. Help me understand why the shift in the vice principal allocations.
So I'll take it. Go ahead. You want me to take it first, Jenny? And you
Go ahead. You got it.
So I think it's an enrollment issue. If enrollment is declining, that can cause a VP move. And in addition to that, I believe the allocation model changed from direct reports to enrollment. But Jenny, I'm over my skis already. So
well, you did a perfect job. So that's exactly it. Those two things were it.
Thank you.
Does that answer all your questions, Tom?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Bettina, you were next with questions.
I had just a couple of questions. What would the process look like if the budget that is passed on June 30th is not adequate? Is there an official amendment process that would happen, or would you just go into the new year knowing you need to work with the budget as it comes?
thanks, Bettina, for that. So that would be at the pleasure of the school board, and we could engage in that conversation. But generally speaking, when I've run into these situations in the past, we've left the appropriation level and then provided the board with the supplement of what we were actually doing as a district. In other cases, we could go back and go through a process to lower all of our appropriation levels. But that would be a future discussion with the board.
Okay.
Kind of their pleasure.
Thank you. If I may, two other questions. Is there already a discussion of how to adequately staff to help students with any deficits that they begin the next year with? You know, if current instruction just isn't enough for all students, you know, I think we know that students are buying into their online learning at different levels, and so that they may return to the fall term in vastly different places in terms of their learning readiness. So would they need additional teachers' aides, or would we need, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm wondering if anybody's asking that question within the district.
So Bettina, we have had some of those discussions at the cabinet level, both revolving around summer school and then what we look like next year. I don't know if Jenny, you want to talk about some of the details around that, or Danielle, or.
This is Dawn. One of the things that we're looking at, Bettina, is exactly what you talked about. We've got to look at our scope and sequence, because we know that some of those critical standards will not be, all of the critical standards will not be taught in this short time, because we're really now just focusing on what are those power standards that need to be taught. So it's going to require us to go back and really adjust our scope and sequence at the beginning of the year. For those students, and there could have to be some possibly shifting of resources depending on which group of students that you're looking at. And I think it would look different at different levels. At a high school level, where they're having, right now they're having, right now we're looking at basically it's a passing complete, but what does that really mean when we get those our current 9 through 11 graders back in the classroom, because we do want to make sure that they have that knowledge. So we are thinking about it. That's what I will tell you. We're looking at summer schools, what the possibilities are there. But once again, not knowing what the possible resources could be, it's so difficult right now, but we are having those conversations.
Thank you. One last question, if I may. Is the PYP, MYP funding is that gone? Is that not in for discussion anymore?
Yeah, right now, Jenny, I don't see Jenny. Right now, that is not currently being budgeted for. You're correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Leanne, did you want to read your question next?
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to find out if we were to follow the budget that's been presented, and we get to be lucky enough to add 2 new pre-K programs in our district, where would they have been targeted to be opened at? Which schools would you locate them in?
Oh, I'm trying to think. I need to get back to you on that, unless Danielle or Toshiko have. Does anybody know?
Leanne, I think it would be whatever schools they're in. It's our 2 next highest poverty schools.
Yeah, I don't want to say a school that it's not. So let me check on it for you.
Jessica knows.
I know. I have them budgeted in there. I have them in at McKinley Elementary and Fir Grove Elementary for the 2021 year.
Thank you. See, you are wonderful.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Miles, one of our new budget committee members, you have a question?
Yeah, I have 2 questions actually. The first one is, do we have an idea of what the estimated deferred maintenance cost is currently?
By deferred maintenance, you mean across the district, or you?
Yeah.
So I know we were on a call this morning where we were having those discussions with deferred maintenance with a study that McKinstry's done for us. I think we could get those for you. I'm looking at you, Deputy Superintendent Mead.
Yes, we definitely can get those numbers for you. I don't have them at the top of my head. No, I don't want to pull a number out of the sky here. So we'll definitely get those numbers for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
And a second question, I was just wondering, are we going to anticipate any savings from transportation, not busing kids for the last 2 months, and from the facilities, the electric, the water, those kind of things? And what kind of number would that be?
Yeah, so we're getting those now. In terms of, we know our water bill is going to be less. We know our electricity bills going down, natural gas bills, all those kinds of savings. We are so early in the savings period. We're just now getting some of the information and numbers. We do know that without our buses rolling, we are saving money there. The interesting thing on the transportation side is that's transportation grant funding. So the way that will work is we are being paid as if our buses are rolling now, like they have been, prior to this. And next year, we will be reconciled against what we actually spent in transportation, and all districts across the state will be. And so it will be interesting to see what that means to us, right? Because every district, the way this works is every district in the state will be reconciled according to what they actually spent. Any dollars that don't have to go to the transportation grant go back into the state school fund. So then it gets distributed by ADMW. So it's going to be, while we're getting savings, it's going to be adjusted in every district in the state in a year. And then how that plays back into the state school fund is going to be interesting. It's a complicated answer, and I apologize. I'll have more to tell at future budget meetings in terms of some of the savings we're looking at, but we are looking for every opportunity. I know we're reducing things like trash service because we just don't need it. We're reducing frequencies there. So we have been leaving no stone unturned there.
Thank you.
Miles, on the instruction side, we're finding out with the distance learning, we're not spending as much money on substitutes right now, at least. And so, and along with that, because of the stay-at-home rule, we're not spending money on professional development and travel expenses that we normally incurred through the end of the year. That would include everything from like field trips to folks going to professional development opportunities, and so that travel. So we are recovering some funds there at this time. And once again, I think the more that we can recover in this fiscal year will reduce the number of layoffs that we'll be looking at in the next fiscal year.
Thank you. Anne, you had a question?
Yeah, I just had a follow-up question related to what Tom was asking about with the SAM. I was guessing that the chart that Jessica walked us through that showed the impact of both the local option and the student investment account might have some clues in it regarding how SAM changes are being made school by school. And I just was wondering if I was making the right assumption on that or not. And also a related question is how much of the SAM changes are dependent on the Student Investment Act money?
So the chart with the general fund, local option levy, and the SIA in it, it does show the impact of where the teachers are, but it wouldn't show you the comparison of what it would have done, what it would have been if we hadn't changed the SAM model.
So is it not, it's not fair to say that whatever it was this year would be that, you know,
Yes, if you pulled it from this year's 1920 budget and compared it, then that would show the impacts.
okay. And then just the follow-up question then is how much of the SAM changes are dependent on the funding coming from the Student Investment Act, and how much of it are just related to what's in the general funds budget?
So, Anne, about half of the SIA, I think it's just a little over half of the SIA is stuff that's included in the SAM in some way. So $15 million worth of stuff.
Okay, thank you. Were there other questions at this time from the Budget Committee? Bettina?
Yes, I just received a text from a community member, so I'll pass the question along because it's something I don't understand completely either. Can you please clarify how the counselor ratios are changing at the middle school level? And also maybe add if the approach to this is, being altered a little bit as we go forward with the idea that the kids might need more support going into the fall.
So from the SAM perspective, Jenny, you might want to weigh in, but I believe at the secondary level, ratios were based on the poverty adjustment. But again, I'd need Jenny to.
Mike, I can.
Danielle.
This is Danielle Hudson. I can speak to the counselor changes at the middle school and secondary and high school level. Both were adjusted in that we are counting the poverty allocation, but additionally, we reduced our counseling ratios from 1 to 400 down to 1 to 300. Correct, Jessica? Yes. So it's actually a reduction of 100 students per counselor. Additionally, schools with higher poverty, the students will have an additional weighting to increase the counselor allocation at those buildings.
So is it fair to say then that all the middle schools will see an increase in counselors from this current year?
There was an allocation or additional allocation across the board at middle school and high school as a result.
So Bettina, I would say, according to the budget that you're looking at, yes. According to our reality in the fall, I would not count on that.
Okay, because it's related to Student Success Act money, or?
And just the general fund and where we are. Okay. I think we are going to have lots of things back on the table in terms of reduction, depending on the size of those reductions. So I think there will be, we have a SAM, we started with an ideal staffing allocation methodology that was brought down to what we could afford resource-wise as a district. And now we're going to have another go at SAM to say, all right, based on potential reductions, here's what we can afford to staff at. And that'll be a combination of SIA and the general fund.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bettina, this is Don. I think you bring up an important fact though, because, as I said, 60, 90 days ago, we were all in this euphoria where we thought we were going to have all of these resources coming in, additional funding and everything. And I believe that a lot of folks out there, they don't understand the cliff that we're headed for. So number one, if any of the Student Investment Act money will be there, but even if some of it was there, I think there's a good possibility that it could be used to backfill the general fund. And when the governor was in her conference and she was talking, she came out and she basically said, recommending that school districts not plan on spending any of those Student Investment Act dollars. So, I think as we go forward, I think reality is really going to come to us all. If it hasn't come to us, just right now, even in our district, we see our homeless numbers going up. We've got our families and children out there, families that are out of work. They're not being able to receive any dollars. And so I think as this pandemic goes on, it's going to really be expensive. It's really going to travel fast, and I think it's going to travel hard. And we're trying to figure out what are the best ways to message that. We definitely don't want to scream the sky's falling, but we want to give folks, we want to be very transparent about what's about to happen, not only in the Beaverton School District. This is going to happen in the other 196 school districts in Oregon. And when I'm talking to my counterparts, they are trying to plan for that. I see Tom Collette, our board member up there, and he's had to lay off 600-700 workers. This is really going to shake our economy. And I don't think it's just going to shake it for a short time. I think it's going to be think it's going to be shaken for a year, 2, 3 years down the road.
Thank you all.
Sarah, you have a few questions?
Yes. And generally right now, how are we doing on connectivity for our students and even staff members to be able to do this distance learning? I know it's not quite this budget.
Steve, is Steve Langford on there, or is he?
Yep. Hi, everyone.
There you go. There's
Hi, everyone. We have, as Mike mentioned earlier in the meeting, the bond has given us a great position to get devices out to students, and that has very much helped the remote learning and distance learning plans. We are challenged with students who do not have internet connectivity at this time. We are looking at a number of options, including trying to acquire hotspots. Inventory is down as districts are trying to acquire, so we do have orders in to address that. We're looking at possibilities such as putting routers on buses and trying to get those out across the city as well. We have a number of different strategies we're pursuing right now, but we do know that for some of our families, connectivity continues to be a challenge.
Do you have any idea what those numbers look like, or a percentage across our district of even students who haven't been? I know one of my teachers, children's students, my teacher said that she hasn't even heard from 2 of her students.
Yeah, we don't have exact numbers, but as we've asked questions on surveys, it's come in around 10% of our students across the district that would find themselves in either a situation where they did not have internet or they did not have adequate internet connectivity.
So yeah, that was my sister is a teacher in South Carolina, and she's from a small rural district, and she said, how do you not have buses that have Wi-Fi? How do you guys have that? And I was like, yeah, I'll ask. But that was
one of the strategies.
Yeah, that I've seen being implemented, but I can understand in a bigger district too that it's actually might be harder for that. And then I was thinking about our recovered funds. The funds that we're able to recover right now through some savings, and being able to, have we allocated or shifted some of those funds to put in more resources on something like that?
We have, as I mentioned, we do have hotspot orders in, and we were able to take some existing savings in the technology budget and repurpose those for hotspots connectivity.
And is everyone on our staff able to connect?
Not everyone. We do have some staff who live in rural areas are experiencing challenges as well with regard to connectivity. And facilities has worked to accommodate staff by letting them come in and work, because our buildings are connected. And so we are exploring that as well for some staff. It's not a large number of staff that have notified us, but there are some staff where they live is posing a connectivity issue.
Okay, excellent.
Sarah, may I follow up on that as well?
Yeah.
So those staff members that we are permitting to come into the building, because we have locked out all staff across the district, their badges are not working. We have provided that access, but we are also then having our custodians come in, and they are cleaning all touch points in which that staff member would have traveled throughout the day in the facility. You also happen to mention, excuse me, that one of your children's teachers had said that they were not able to touch base with 2 students. Our teaching and learning staff are working with principals to gather that information, and principals are doing outreach to those families specifically.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, back to a more general, good old budget question. On page 30, it mentions the challenges of when we switched from last year, when we went from the early release Wednesdays, and the need to actually get more substitutes now. Do we have a cost comparison of whether we are really actually saving money now if we have to pay for substitutes and in lieu of the early release?
This year will be challenging to get that number again because school essentially ended in the middle of March. But we can go back and take a look at some of that. I know that part of our problem was that we had under budgeted subs just originally, regardless of purpose. It was just we had generally under budgeted them. So we can take a look at how that might work, Sarah, but it probably isn't going to be an awesome comparison.
Yeah, maybe
year.
it's like that. You have that allocation through March, or that that stopping point through March that maybe we can compare, because obviously that was a huge issue, switching that this past year. So if we really aren't, that was the gist of it, was that we're going to save money. Well, are we really saving money if we're having to get substitutes all the time for our kids?
So by that, Sarah, do you want to know, and again, we'll have to get into it and see what we can track, but subs that we purchase for professional development this year versus the year before, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, maybe over the same, and maybe over that 6-month period, beginning of school to Christmas break, is it the same as the year before? Because I mean, that was the theory, was we added instructional days so that we'd have these early release days, and we'd have our teachers, our full-time teachers, and our, and whatever that's called, that dedicated teacher time. So are we really saving money there? I would be interested to see, I think.
And I'm not sure how we track those, Sarah, so we'll have to get back to you.
Yeah. Oh, I noticed on page 33, safety challenges on, and obviously a pandemic brings up, what if there really was a natural disaster, an immediate and natural disaster? Would our school district be prepared? It says it's basically not, that there's not a good enough emergency response system set up. And I know we're going to be scrambling on budgets, but is, safety and emergency response anything to, cut on? So just wondering what was the amount? What are we looking at that is needed to become adequate?
Okay, we'll take a look.
In addition to that, Sarah, the difficulty in that is our community is not ready for a disaster. We have been informed by police and fire both, as most likely ambulance service in a natural disaster, we're on our own. They will not have the resources to come to our schools to assist us. They will have greater needs that they will need to take care of. So it'd be a large bucket.
Right. I'm just wondering what that amount. It's the challenge. I'm like, well, what's the scope of the challenge there? So, and I'll add some things online. I know we're running late here. So, thanks everyone.
Thank you.
I believe that was the end of our time for questions from the committee, unless anyone had anything that needed to be addressed in the immediate. Okay. We do, as a reminder, have that Google Doc that we can submit budget committee questions, and those will be answered by the district for us in detail with numbers and specific answers, which is really helpful before our next meeting. The next item on our agenda is to set the agenda for our May 4th meeting, and Jessica Jones is going to do that for us.
Okay, so on the May 4th agenda, we will have the minutes from tonight's meeting for approval. There will be a COVID-19 update. And at the May 4th meeting, we will be doing public comment again, similar to tonight's format. The public comment can be submitted on the district's budget webpage, which is also linked on this slide. or it can be done by mail to the district administration's office, labeled clearly as budget committee public testimony. Any comment that is received before 5 p.m. on May 2nd will be presented to the committee at the May 4th meeting. But as a reminder, it won't have answers. It will just be presented. We will bring back answers to the public comments from tonight if they required answers. And then the May 4th meeting will also have time for budget committee questions and discussions, as well as I have 3 things that I've written down to bring back. If I've missed something, please let me know. But I have a question about how our salaries compare to other districts, a comparison between for the schools for what the classroom teacher allocations would have looked like had we not changed the model, to what it looks like with the new model, and also a sub comparison. Anything else?
Jessica. I asked this question on the chat. I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Is it required of the budget committee to approve the agenda for the May 4th meeting at this time, or we're just setting it?
No, we just set it and say these are the things. And it's also a way for me to make sure that I've caught all of the questions that I need to bring back.
Okay, perfect. With that, we will have our closing remarks from Don.
Just thank you all once again for being here and doing all of this distance. We're distance learning ourselves here as this goes through. And what I will tell you, there's several other districts. I know some folks that are tuning into us tonight because they like to look to Beaverton to see how to do things. So I know that some of my colleagues are actually watching our budget process, but I just want to thank you all. I really want to stop and say shout out to Jessica and Mike and your entire business team. I know this has been an incredible journey that we're on, and there's a lot of unknowns, and you folks have done just a great job. So thank you.
Thank you, John. I just want to say a quick thank you too to those who are behind the scenes who are making it so that we are able to stream live and keeping us running on the tech side of things. So thank you to those. And with that, our budget committee meeting is adjourned until May 4th. We'll see you all then. Thank you.
Thank you.